William Lowe and myself, Ralph Preston, are here again to do another roadmap talk. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of involving both sides of your brain in your stroke recovery. William, I know you got some thoughts on this, so why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, sure thing, Ralph. I'll be happy to. So I think in recovery after stroke, if there's one thing I've learned through my years of recovery as myself, as well as exchanging notes with hundreds of stroke survivors and theirs, is that it's really important and it can be very powerful to engage both sides of your body when it comes to your recovery after stroke. And the reason why I say this is because when you make an active effort to engage both sides of your body in your recovery after stroke, there's a possibility that you can encourage this phenomenon, which is called bihemispheric reorganization. And when you hear this term, you're probably thinking that this is some really, really abstract scientific thing. And it actually is, because research has actually shown that in recovery after stroke, that if you can engage both hemispheres of your brain to communicate with each other, it can actually allow your brain to learn a lot quicker. And the reason why this works is because prior to having your stroke, both sides of your brain, in other words, both of your hemispheres, were in constant communication with each other, which is the reason why whenever you were doing day-to-day tasks, such as driving on the road, you were able to maintain a conversation at the same time, because one part of your brain was obviously focused on the driving, and the other part of your brain was obviously focused with the conversation at the same time. Now, what tends to happen in recovery after stroke, and what the research has shown, is that after you've had a stroke, one hemisphere actually shuts down completely, and it no longer receives that cross communication from the other side, nor is it sending out signals over to the other side at the same time. And the downside of this hemisphere actually shutting down is that it can actually limit your recovery and limit your potential to actually see more changes in your recovery after stroke. So when it comes to engaging both sides in your recovery after stroke, I think this is paramount, because if you can make a conscious effort to really involve both sides in your recovery after stroke, you can encourage more of that cross communication, which used to happen before you had your stroke, and really allow your brain to become more optimized for recovery so that you can get the best possible outcome in your recovery after stroke. And the research actually shows is that once you actually encourage that cross communication between both sides through things such as involving both sides of your body, you can actually learn things a lot quicker, because your brain is getting back to that default state of where it used to be before your stroke, where the signals are going across both hemispheres. And in other words, your brain is able to connect dots a lot quicker because that part of your brain is no longer shut down. And a problem I see with a lot of stroke survivors is that they rely a lot on their non-affected side, and because they're relying a lot on their non-affected side to do a lot of activities, that part of their brain which was damaged, it remains shut down, and it no longer sends signals or receives signals from the other side of the other hemisphere. And this can severely limit your brain's ability to actually continue to recover and continue to see more changes. And it can also result in you actually coming to a standstill or a plateau in your recovery, where you're no longer able to see as many changes as you would like to. So now that I've covered the importance of bihemispheric reorganization and why this is so important to recovery after stroke, I wanted to take a moment to just talk about what are some ways or what are some things you can do to actually encourage this cross communication between both hemispheres of your brain, to really allow this bihemispheric reorganization to take place so that you can see more changes and improvements in your recovery after stroke. So the first thing you could do is you could actually apply this to your walking. And the reason why I say this is because when it comes to walking, the reason why it's very easy to learn how to walk again in your recovery after stroke is because your brain mainly takes a lot of reference from the non-affected leg when it comes to walking. And in fact, a lot of the muscles which are around your stomach and also above your trunk, above the upper part of your leg, they actually are shared between both sides of your brain. which is why you've always heard of a 6-pack and you've never heard of a 3-pack. It's because if you try to flex up one side of your body or one side of your stomach, you'll notice that you can't. You'll notice that the other side naturally wants to go up. So when it comes to recovery after stroke, I believe that a way you can get both sides involved in your walking so that you can teach your brain how to walk a lot quicker and allow your brain to really connect the dots is to do exercises such as bridges. And for those of you who are watching, who might be unfamiliar with what a bridge exercise is, it's basically where you're doing where you're lying down on your back and you're slanting your stomach such that you're like that and your legs are bent down towards the ground and your feet are flat. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to maintain that position. And the reason why a bridge exercise is so good is because it teaches your brain how to calibrate itself so that it learns how to distribute weight equally across both sides of your body. And this is important because when it comes to recovery after stroke and walking, a lot of the time your brain relies mainly on your non-affected leg to take on most of the weight of your body when you're walking. And if you want to get as close as possible to where you were before your stroke, in other words, to a place where both of your legs are taking on equal amounts of weight, so that you don't walk as if one leg is dead weight, or you don't walk as if you're drunk, as many stroke survivors have said, then a bridge exercise is ideal because you're really putting your brain into a pressured environment where it has to balance out how to distribute that weight equally by turning on all the right muscles which it needs to turn on when it comes to walking, such as your hip extensors, your glutes, and also your core muscles at the same time. So that's one example of an exercise which you can do to engage both sides of your body. I believe another exercise you could do, and Ralph and I were talking about this earlier, is going to the gym and going on the elliptical machine or the NuStep machine, which is basically a recumbent bike where you're really engaging both sides of your body, both your arms and your legs, to really teach your brain how to distribute that weight equally across each step as you push through. Those are some of the exercises which you could do to actually encourage this cross communication when it comes to teaching your brain how to learn how to walk again, so that your brain is able to connect the dots a lot better. Now, how this relates to your upper body is that the same concept actually applies. And one of the exercises which you can do to actually encourage that cross communication between both sides of your brain is you can try doing exercises which involve both sides of your body, such as picking up a ball with both arms, as well as picking up a PVC pipe and lifting it up as if you would like a bodybuilder with both hands as well. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the fact that you're performing that movement with both sides is going to encourage that cross communication in your brain and allow for that bi-hemispheric reorganization to actually take place. So as you can see with everything I've shared just now, the overarching theme and the overarching idea is that the more you involve both sides of your body in your recovery after stroke, the more likely you're able to encourage this cross communication, or this bi-hemispheric reorganization, which will allow your brain to get to a place where it has that cross communication where it used to have before you actually had a stroke. And this in turn will allow your brain to connect the dots a lot quicker when it comes to your recovery after stroke, which will allow you to learn things a lot quicker and allow you to see more positive outcomes when it comes to your recovery after stroke. Now, Ralph, earlier you and I, we were talking about some of our experiences of involving both sides of our body in our recovery after stroke. I've shared some of the exercises I've personally used in my own recovery, but I know you've also had some experiences where you've also used or involved both sides of your body in your recovery after stroke. I was just curious, for the folks who are watching this, would you be able to share some of those experiences which you've had involving both sides of your body?
Sure. Well, bridges are good. I got one or two more things I can add to the bridges discussion. and that is if you put a ball or a towel or a bike helmet I've used between your legs when you're doing a bridge and push in, it'll tend to force your affected leg to do more of the work. If you put a band, a stretch band around your knees and pull out when you do bridges, it forces your glutes to engage. I have a video on bridges and also one on a PVC pipe or a dowel that I'll post in the description underneath this video. I did a lot of stuff. I didn't know the term bilateral or bilateral patterning, but I did a lot of involving of both sides of my body. I would say accidentally, but it wasn't accidental because I guess I got on this thing that when I couldn't do something over here, I'd look over here and see, and I started mimicking, and I learned to roll my fingers, doing it bilaterally, doing uh, like 5 together, and then practicing with my affected hand. And yeah, I can do it both ways because I practice it both ways. So it would fall apart in the early days. I'd do 1 or 2 and it would get all wonky again. So I'd do 5 more and pattern my brain. So I just kind of fell into it. Another thing was I started doing like some simple theraband, double band stuff where I had 2 bands, or I looped a band through a loop and had 2 handles and would do the same, whether they were pulls this way or pushes or overhead or whatever way I was doing the band. I often did it on both sides. Let's see, what else? You talked about so many things I have to remember all my mental notes. Oh yeah, when you talked about grabbing a ball, I had interviewed a stroke survivor who said that the single greatest tool in her recovery, physical tool, was she bought a like $7 or $8 kickball, one of those red rubber kickballs, and she'd kick it against the wall and it'd force her into balance stuff. But bilaterally, you can pick it up. You can also dribble it from one hand to the other. There's lots of things you can do with a kickball. You can also throw it against the wall both hands, or bounce it both hands, try and catch it. Remember, there's a reason they do that thing with the bigger balls in physical therapy. They often have you bat them back and forth between you and the therapist. So first of all, it's good in terms of core engaging, but you're also having to, you're using both hands. You're also, I don't know how this plays into it, but you have to make a decision as to which hand or whether you're doing both hands. Let's see, so what other exercises? I mean, just about everything I did bilaterally. Oh, I got concerned with, I started to say when I didn't know what this side should do, I looked over here. Well, when I would do things like put my arms up and this one would be drooping, I started, I'd raise it up, and then I started working with a mirror, both with walking and with doing these guys. I don't know, they don't have a name, but I got into, I call it Symmetry. I'll add that video. So, in my recovery, I just suddenly said, well, this side knows what to do, this side doesn't. So you can learn from the teaching side, can teach the healing side. And the other thing was I got into Symmetry because when this side didn't know where it was, like this side, a stroke survivor can't hardly move their arm, can still take their unaffected arm and stick it out straight and level and look out there and it will be level. Well, as you get this arm up and up and up, you're not exactly so sure where it is. So like I said, I worked in a mirror, and I'm a big believer in symmetry, because I, I think it actually may relate back to what we're talking about here. If you do things in a symmetrical way, I can't see how you wouldn't be helping this bihemispheric reorganization going on. Never heard of any kind of terms like that, or even bilateral patterning, but I did a lot of it. I did it in lots of things that I did, and once I did this with my hands, and I have a demo that I do, and I discovered it worked, and I then tried to apply it to all kinds of things, like when I do a single step roll off, which is where you land on your heel and you go out. I often do them with both sides and follow all the way through, because I find that, especially if you start off with the unaffected side, sometimes it'll help the affected side know what to do. That's because there's some percentage of signals that stay on the same side, and there's cross communication, and using both sides is going to help facilitate both. I know, William, you had some thoughts earlier on that when we were talking. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure thing. So basically, in my recovery after stroke, one of the things I've learned when I went to OT school and when I was doing a lot of research on my own is that in recovery after stroke, some of the pathways from your spinal cord, they actually go towards both hemispheres of your brain. And sometimes in recovery after stroke, if you want to if you want to get back more recovery, what you want to do is you want to do things which involve both sides of your body, because you can essentially encourage your brain to get some connections back from pathways which cross across both sides of your brain. So the way to think about this, and this is something which Ralph and I were talking about earlier, is that you want to imagine your spinal cord, as a highway sort of system, and your highway goes up to your brain, and when it gets to your brain, you've got turnoffs going to both sides of your brain. Now, what happens in recovery after stroke, or what happens when you have a stroke, is one of the turnoffs, they actually get destroyed, or they actually get demolished, meaning that some of the signals from your spinal cord are not receiving signals from one side of your brain. But that doesn't mean that you can't still receive signals from one of the earlier turnoffs from the highway as well. And the way to do this is to actually, again, involve both sides of your body in your recovery after stroke through some of the exercises which we were talking about here, so that you can get that bihemispheric reorganization going, whether this be through some of that symmetry practice which Ralph was talking about, as well as just using little things such as placing the ball between your legs when you're doing a bridge, to give your brain a reference point of how to actually do an exercise correctly. Because if you drop the ball when you're doing that bridge and you're squeezing the ball together, then you know that you're doing it wrong. Whereas if you're keeping the ball in place between both of your legs while you're doing the bridge, you know that you're turning on all those muscles correctly, and you're teaching your brain how to correctly calibrate itself so that it can distribute weight equally across both sides of your body, so that in turn, when it comes to your walking, you're able to do the exact same thing, so that you don't get to a place where you're walking like how some people might describe themselves as walking like they're drunk, or walking as if they have to amp themselves up once they stay on one leg in order to heave the other leg forward at the same time as well. So that's basically a really layman's terms way of explaining why it is important to involve both sides of your body when it comes to your recovery. And I guess a more granular approach to how you're able to get more of those signals firing, and how you're able to wake up that part of your brain which was damaged after your stroke by doing some of the things that Ralph and I have discussed here so far.
Okay. Did you want to talk a little bit about what you call? Well, I'll start off by saying another thing that I did was I found that you could use one side to tell the other side, make it easier, what the motion was, and make it easier to do it. I also found that sometimes I would, if I wanted to do a task with my affected hand, I would watch if it was a single thing and wasn't bilateral. I guess I first discovered it when I was making potato salad and picked up 3 potatoes. I didn't do a very good job with my affected hand, so I watched how I did it with my unaffected hand. And part of this could be cognitive as well as the signals going back and forth, because I paid attention to how I did it, and I guess I maybe had like a little temporary blueprint on how I did it with my right hand, and I went and did it with my left hand, and it went. I recorded on a cell phone, so I know it took me 6 seconds to pick them up the first time. It took me about 1 second to pick them up with my right hand. It took about less than 2 seconds the second time. So it was 3 times faster just from watching and having that, I guess having that memory. William, this is what you call transference. So, scientists confuse the issue with ipsilateral patterning and whatever. Maybe
Yeah, that's right. So
talk a little bit about transference before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure thing. So for those folks who are watching Ralph and I chat here today, you've probably noticed that we've talked a lot about this idea of bihemispheric reorganization and making sure to involve both sides of your body. And some of the examples we've shared are exercises which you can do to actually get this cross communication going. But these exercises can only get you so far, and there are other techniques which you can actually use to actually encourage this cross communication to happen, so that you can actually see more changes in your recovery after stroke and be able to re-educate your brain on how to, for example, perform a movement which it would otherwise find a little bit tricky to do in a much better way. And the way you can do this is by doing certain things in your recovery after stroke which allow for what I like to call transference. Now, this isn't a term which is heavily researched, but it's just a term which I came up with as I was thinking about a lot of recovery, a lot of things in recovery after stroke, and also something I noticed in the clients which I personally coach as well. So it's basically this idea that when it comes to recovery after stroke, sometimes you can actually teach your brain how to perform something a lot better, say a movement a lot better, if you first try doing it with your non-affected side first. And the reason why this works is because by doing something with your non-affected side first, you can give your brain a reference point of how to actually send those signals through to actually perform that movement on the affected side the exact same way. And the reason why this happens is because, going back to what I said about cross communication in your brain, every contraction on one side of your body actually results in a really, really small contraction on the other side of your body at the same time. So what this means is that in your recovery after stroke, if you've ever found yourself in a place where you find it a little bit tricky to send a signal from your brain to try and lift up your arm so that you're lifting up straight rather than lifting up like a crane like that, one thing you can do to allow your brain to calibrate and really dial into that signal of how to actually send that signal through to the affected side to lift up the arm in a more efficient manner is to actually try performing it with your non-affected side first. And by performing it with your non-affected side first, and really staying present and really dialing into what it feels like to send that signal through to your non-affected side and how that sensation feels like, what you can try to do is you can try to do the exact same movement on your affected side after. And what you might find is that you're able to perform that movement a lot better on your affected side after. And the reason why this happens is because whenever you do something first with your affected side, before doing it on your whenever you do something first on your non-affected side, before you try doing it on your affected side, your brain actually takes a Polaroid snapshot picture of what it feels like to send through those signals and that blueprint of how to perform that movement on your non-affected side, and tries to replicate the exact same thing and do the exact same thing on your affected side once you've tried to transfer it across. So for the clients who I've shown this to, they've found that after they've actually tried to do something first on their non-affected side, they find that they're actually able to perform something a lot better on their affected side. And the reason why this happens is because your brain constantly requires a reference point to learn how to do something a lot better. And if you can provide that reference point with your non-affected side first, some of those signals which used to cross over from both hemispheres, they can actually cross over temporarily, and you can take advantage of that cross communication, which is retained for about 5 to 10 seconds because your brain has taken that Polaroid snapshot picture and apply it to your affected side so that you can educate your affected side to perform movements a lot better. And I believe, based on what you shared with everyone in our chat here tonight, Ralph, that's something which you probably experienced when it came to your symmetry movements, which you were performing with the mirror, as well as when you were trying to mimic moving your fingers on your right side versus your left side at the same time. And also, it's probably the reason why when it came to picking up potatoes, you were able to pick up potatoes a lot quicker once you actually did it first with your non-affected side, and you took advantage of that Polaroid snapshot picture that your brain retained, and you were able to apply it to your affected side to be able to pick up the potatoes a little bit quicker because your brain was able to calibrate itself and really dial into that signal of what it felt like to do it on the non-affected side and apply that learning to the affected side at the same time. So all in all, this is just another way of explaining something which happens in your brain, which is very much similar to muscle memory, but I'm going really deep in the weeds with it, as you can all probably see with terms such as by hemispheric reorganization, as well as cross communication. So that's a really powerful technique which you can use when it comes to your recovery after stroke, to really allow your brain to get unstuck when you find yourself in situations where maybe you're finding it difficult to teach your brain how to send a signal to perform a movement on your affected side, which you can otherwise do on your non-affected side first. So I guess the main thing I wanted to conclude with before passing it back to yourself, Ralph, if you have anything to add, is that in recovery after stroke, what Ralph and I are sharing here tonight is just one of the most powerful things you can do to really see more changes and improvements in your recovery after stroke, involving both sides. Obviously, it can allow for that cross communication in your brain to happen, which can allow your brain to really optimize itself for learning and allow itself to connect the dots a lot quicker, because you're getting back to a state which your brain was in before you actually had your stroke. So I think that that's really powerful, and I hope that you guys found this helpful. Otherwise, Ralph, I just want to pass back to you because I've done a lot of talking. Is there anything else you wanted to share on that?
No, not really. I think we tried to explain it in layman's terms as well as we could. That's why we, talk about potatoes and such, and symmetry and mirrors and whatever. So try and make these things understandable. And other than that, I think it's probably time to get out my 3 tennis balls or make potato salad again, because I want to see like what happens if you wait 5 or 10 seconds. I bet it doesn't work as well. I just kind of discovered this stuff. I'm always noodling around. Well, that's what I'm talking about doing right now, making potato salad again or getting out my tennis balls. I learned how to pick up 3 tennis balls when I was doing something else on. I was actually throwing tennis balls with my affected arm to at 11 years out to show that neuroplasticity always exists. Now I would go pick up, I had 3 balls, I'd go pick them up. I was picking up all 3 with my right hand. I said, oh, I'd learn how to do this with my left hand. So I did, and then I learned how to drop them one at a time. That's a little tricky. So it's time to noodle around a little bit more with this so I understand it more, because I can always use it in my recovery, but I also like to understand these things so that we can explain them in lay terms and based on real experiences with potatoes, tennis balls, kickballs, towels, PVC pipes, dowels, whatever. So, I guess what we'll do is we'll see everybody next time on another roadmap, and I mentioned a couple of videos, and they will be in the description underneath this video, along with information on the other things that William and I do and how you can get in touch with us. So, William, once again, thank you.
No problem, Ralph. It was great to talk with you again.
All right, we'll catch up with everybody next time.